Hello everyone, my name is Raj Pochiraju and I'm a Principal Program Manager at Azure SQL Group in Microsoft. And welcome to the session SQL Server 2022 Azure Integration to Enable Hybrid Solutions Out of the Box. Before we go deep dive into it, let's really examine why customers are really looking for hybrid solutions. Through our experience working with several number of enterprise customers, there are few reasons why customers are adapting hybrid and multi-cloud strategy. Some workloads cannot be moved to the public cloud due to some regulatory and data sovereignty requirements. And this is very common in highly regulated industry like financial industry, healthcare industry, and as well as in governments. Some workloads, especially edge workloads, require low latency and should be able to work on more of a disconnected environment without compromising the integrity of the data. And then the other reason is that many companies have significant on-premises investments that they really want to maximize. So these customers are choosing to modernize on-premises data centers and traditional apps. And finally, it is important to have a freedom and a flexibility to use more than one public cloud. So these are the various reasons, or you can call them as challenges, why when customers are really adapting the hybrid solutions for their business problems. Now, in the remainder of this session, let's really examine how SQL Server 2022, a cloud-connected SQL Server database engine, can provide two hybrid solutions for your business problems. Let's take a look at the SQL Server investments over the years. Continual innovation built into SQL Server, giving you higher return of investments. We brought so much innovation into SQL Server 2016 that makes SQL Server 2016 a true mission critical database server with features like always on encrypted security, query store for predicted performance. And with SQL Server 2017, we expanded our reach to Linux operating system. With built-in support for R and Python, customers can now develop machine learning solutions and bring power of their data to solve their business problems. SQL Server 2019 is simply an intelligent database engine. So while we continue this momentum with SQL Server 2022, we take it to the next level of innovation, a true cloud connected database engine which removes the boundaries between on-prem and cloud, provide true flexibility to build your applications once and deploy, host anywhere that you want. Now SQL Server 2022 is Azure enabled with continued performance and security innovation that is going to bring to you. While we had few hybrid features enabled in the past, we really stepped up our game with SQL Server 2022 and provided true cloud connected capabilities for you. First of all, a fully managed disaster recovery capability that you can now link your on-premises SQL Server 2022 databases to Azure SQL Managed instance, which allows you to build disaster recovery solutions. And then we allow you to avoid ETL operations and run your analyticals on Azure by providing Azure Synapse link for you. Then we integrated the SQL Server 2022 with the Microsoft Purview so that you can really classify your data and then get more insights from your data and then start governing your the SQL Server and apply policies from the Azure itself. While SQL Server is already more secure database with the least number of vulnerabilities reported for last 10 years, we want to make your data more secure by providing Ledger for SQL Server, which include blockchain technology integrated into it. We have been known for providing industry-leading performance database. Now with built-in query intelligence, we auto-tune your databases for best performance. With multi-write replication, help you to build highly scalable and available solutions using your SQL Server engine. With that, we are very proud to announce that SQL Server is a very consistent database, provide consistent experience across your edge and as well as the cloud platforms. Starting from availability in Azure SQL Edge, cloud connected using Azure Arc enabled data services, and then Azure SQL family. Now let's look at all SQL Server 2022 Azure connected scenarios in a single glance. You can replicate your data to Azure SQL Manager instance in the Azure and even failover. You can outsource and run your analytics in the cloud in Azure Synapse Service without really performing complex ETL operations. Microsoft Purview. With Purview, you can get inventory insights about your schema changes, and you can classify your data, and literally you can govern your data from Azure at scale. And more secure authentication using Azure Active Directory. And you can really protect your SQL Server, proactively identify any attacks, vulnerabilities, and then also auto mitigate some of those risks that are identified using Microsoft Defender for SQL Server. Lastly, you can leverage full potential of Azure services by onboarding with Arc enabled SQL Server, and it's pretty easy now to onboard with Arc enabled SQL servers because you have that experience built into the setup itself. During the setup or installation of your SQL Server 2022, now you can really onboard your SQL Server with Arc enabled SQL servers so that you can really maximize the potential of cloud services to really maximize the benefits of your SQL Server 2022. Now let's take a deeper look how the new features that we enabled, the link to the Azure SQL Manager instance, and then go deep dive into it. So SQL Server always has the capabilities for the customers to build the disaster recovery solutions. But the problem with those solutions is that as a customer, you need to set up and maintain that whole configuration of the disaster recovery. So sometimes it can become complex and cumbersome to manage. So with the new feature that we enabled, the link to the Azure SQL Manager instance, you can really deploy and configure easily using the platform as a service capabilities, so that now you can make your Azure SQL Manager instance as your disaster recovery site. Not only that, it can also provide a read scale out solution so that you can really offload your read workload to the manager instance which is running in the cloud. And it has built on top of the distributed availability groups which are built into the solution to begin with. And more exciting thing is that you can really failover bidirectional. You can failover back to SQL Server 2022, or you can failover to SQL Server Manager instance in the case there is a need arises. And more exciting feature here is that now you can be able to go and then restore back your Azure SQL Manager instance database to SQL Server 2022, which is running on the on-prem, which is the most desirable feature that our customers really ask for that. So that way, the link to the managed instance is going to solve several business problems. One is the disaster recovery, and then you can really offload your read workloads to managed instance, and then you can restore back and forth the databases from managed instance to SQL Server 2022 and SQL Server 2022 to managed instance, and you can fail over back and forth between on-premises and as well as the cloud. So that gives a lot of flexibility to establish your disaster recovery solutions. Now it's the demo time. Before we go to the demo of the SQL MI link, and I want to explain how this whole thing actually works. So basically, you can establish a real-time replication between a SQL server, which is hosted anywhere. It could be on-premises or any data center, or hosted by a provider, or sitting in any other clouds, or even a VM, right? Any SQL server which is running on anywhere, that you can establish an MI link to a Azure SQL Managed Instance, which is a platform as a service on the Azure, and you can really use that as your disaster recovery site, right? And then the replication is real-time replication actually. So the way it works is that it is going to leverage the distributed availability groups technology. To do that, you have to have an availability group, which is kind of very old, pretty good technology, pretty stable technology, starting from SQL Server 2012. So you have to have availability group on primary replica, which is your on-premises SQL Server, and then you also need to have availability group on the SQL Managed Instance, which is a secondary replica site, right? And then distributed availability groups provide a bridge between the two availability groups. That's how it really works in terms, right? So you have to have availability group and then distributed availability groups on top of it. Now, these availability groups, or the actual MI link, is at the database level scope. But even before you do that, it is important that you establish a secure link between your SQL Server and your managed instance. So that is the very first step. And this secure link, they share the public keys between the certificates that are there on the managed instance and as well as on the SQL Server, so that they can really establish a secured, encrypted, trusted connection between the primary and as well as the secondary, right? And then the replication is at the MI link is at the database scope. So you can have databases participating in the MI link from different SQL servers going into a single managed instance, or databases on the same SQL Server instance on-prem can also go to multiple managed instances as well. So it's kind of a many to many, but the scope is always at individual database level. So you can literally create 100 database links to managed instance in case if you want to really establish this disaster recovery link between multiple databases. You can do that. The scenarios that you can really leverage, of course, MI can be your disaster site, or you can really load balance your read workloads to managed instance, like you are saying, read only workloads, or you can even use for migration as well. Like in case if you are really migrating your existing on-premises SQL Server to managed instance, you can establish this MI link and then can really achieve near zero downtime migration experience. One last point that I want to make: while the databases on the managed instance in this diagram are participating as a secondary databases in the whole setup, you can still have the databases which are not participating on MI link with read and write intention on the managed instance as well, right? So you can have all type of combinations and flexibility in this whole scenario to begin with. Now let's get to the actual action. I have my SQL Server 2022 database in the on-prem, and then I have wide world importers database that I want to do an MI link with SQL Server 2022 MI link, which is sitting in the Azure. So I'm going to go to wide world importers, right click on it, Azure manage instance link, and then click on replicate database, select the specific database that I want to replicate. Go to the next step where I'm going to sign into the Azure portal. So I'm going to sign in, select the specific resource group, and then select the managed instance, and then log in to the managed instance using Azure, Management Studio. I'm going to give the SQL authentication over here, and then I'm going to do a connect. Go to the next step. Here you provide an availability group name. Note that both the names for the availability group and as well as the distributed availability groups are automatically generated for multiple databases. Actually, they are going to be, you don't have to give the names, we are going to be generating it for you. And then go to the next step here. Now that's pretty much it. Summary, finish. Now it is really creating the distributed availability groups between the primary and secondary. I'm going to run this command on SQL Server 2022. Yep, read write intent, and then the version number. Make sure that you note that version number, because you're going to get the same version number back in a managed instance as well. Right now the status is synchronized, and you see that the availability groups and as well as the distributed availability groups are automatically created for us. Now I'm going to go to the MI link on the Azure portal, and right there is a database. Wide world importers are already created and it is online actually. Now I'm going to run the same commands on the managed instance, and it shows that the managed instance right there, but read only intent, and then the same version 945 is created for the database. I'm going to refresh, and you see that wide world import is created. Tables are also created, schema. So let's take a look at it, how this whole thing actually works underneath. So these are the T-SQL commands also you can use to create availability groups or the MI link, to establish an MI link. So at first you are going to create an availability group on the source, which is our SQL Server 2022, and you're also going to create an availability group in a distributed mode. You provide listeners information for both primary and secondary, and then you can fully automate this whole script using the script that I provided, so that you can automate the whole process. Now SQL instance link there, command that actually establishes the link. You can actually find out the status of the availability groups or the seeding, how the synchronization is happening, using some of the DMVs that I'm showing on the screen. These are the availability groups on SQL Server 2022, and yeah, so they are in synchronization. So look at the primary and secondary there, and both are in asynchronous commit mode, as you see, and the status looks pretty good to me. And then now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a table called vehicles on my SQL Server, which is our primary at this point, SQL Server 2022, and I'm also going to create a vehicle at stock items. So I got, and populating those tables as well. So I'm going to run this script, execute this script and see if this data is get replicated on the managed instance. Now I'm going to be executing the command, select command on the managed instance. You see that the information is already got replicated. Now let's expand wide world importers table here, looks at the refresh the tables in case if you don't see the new tables that you just created. And you see that the vehicle stock items and vehicles are right there. So the tables are created and the tables are also populated. Now I'm going to run the ostress on the source, and then I'm going to inject more vehicles into my stock. Yep, there are my vehicles stock is now updated. Now I'm going to be failing over to the managed instance. You log into the Azure portal, and then here you are going to be mentioning the failover type to ensure no data loss happens when you really do this failover. Stop the workload on replicated SQL Server database at first. So you need to stop all the traffic that is coming into your primary SQL Server. If there are any long running transactions, make sure that those transactions are completed, and make sure that no external user connections are still exists on the primary server. So that's kind of the way that you plan your failover, is that way. Once you're done with that stuff, then you just hit a confirm button, then it will do the failover. But whereas there is a forced failover option, that means if you are really running into an emergency mode where you need to failover immediately, then you can also initiate a forced failover aspect of it, but it could cause some data loss, especially for those transactions which are committed but not replicated yet, or the transactions which are not committed yet, they are going to roll back. So you might encounter some kind of a data loss in the forced failover, but in case if you are doing it in a manual failover, then make sure that no transactions are pending and no user connections are still active on the primary SQL Server. In this case, it is SQL Server 2022 instance. Okay. Now you need to, so those are the aspects that you need to confirm, and then I'm going to go to the next step. So after the successful failure, there are two options. You can clean up the availability groups in case if you're really doing some and you no longer need them, then you can do the cleaning as well. So it tells you the log sequence numbers which are in sync and everything. You just do hit button, then all the activities are completed actually. That means you are officially failed over to a managed instance. Now I'm going to select on managed instance. Now managed instance become read and write mode actually. That's how you can really use a managed instance link to create a disaster recovery site on the managed instance. For things like you can usually use a high availability target for you, and you also use it for offloading your read workloads, and then finally you can also use it for online migration experience as well. Now think about analytics. A lot of customers today have operational data, and at the same time they don't want those operational workloads to be affected by analyticals workload. So what they do, they use something like Synapse, and then copy the data to Synapse and then do analyticals from Synapse. The problem with that approach is that you still need to copy the data to Synapse and then incrementally update the changes that are happening to your source to your Synapse analyticals, right? So that's the problem. So what can we do to make it better actually? With SQL Server 2022, you could actually link to your operation database to Synapse using the Synapse link. So what does it do? You can really use the SQL pools and then link to the SQL pools, and then we would automatically just take the changes that are happening to your operation database and feed into the Synapse. And all of a sudden now you have a seamless data synchronization between your operations and then to the Synapse data pools. You are just doing near real-time analytics and setup analytics with the Synapse link. Basically, that's what we are doing here. So once you get your data in there now, you have a Synapse, the power of Synapse at your disposal, basically, right? You can really combine your unstructured data with using the data lake with the data which is coming from SQL Server into the SQL pools, and then you can also leverage the Spark, like popular engines like Spark for the parallel processing, and as well as you can also run some machine learning algorithms on top of it to bring intelligence into your data. So, and then you also have a Power BI. Of course, you have a Power BI to build the visualization. So all of a sudden with this Synapse link, you can really get end-to-end package, basically, right? But the most important thing here is that to get the data from your operation database into Synapse without really doing the ETL jobs is the key component which really enabled you to build this end-to-end story for your operations and analyticals solutions to your business problems. Now let's switch to Microsoft Purview. One of the challenges that customers are having is that to get a central place where they can get insights of all their data to begin with, right? Especially in the hybrid world where data is being hosted on-prem and edge devices and data which is sitting on the other clouds or multiple clouds. So for the customers, they want to really look at a central place where they can really look at the inventory and as well as get more insights from the data and how to govern this specific data that they have at multiple places centrally. That is a huge challenge for the customers. So Microsoft Purview service is the one which really help you to look at the inventory of your data and then govern. But then the Purview is now seamlessly integrated into SQL Server 2022 data store. So basically it will automatically scan your on-premises SQL Servers databases and capture all the metadata and then upload to the Microsoft Purview service and then classify data using built-in classifications, and also you can bring your custom classifications, comply with your compliance and regulations, and literally you can protect the sensitive data using the sensitive labels, track the lineage and usage of your dependencies of your data to begin with, and literally you can really set up policies centrally using the Azure policies to really govern your data. So Purview really provides that central location where you can really not only get insights of your data, the dependencies, but at the same time you can really govern and then really implement all your security and as well as the compliance policies in a central location. So that's the power of the Purview, which is brought into now SQL Server 2022 by having a seamless integration into the product itself. Now it's a demo time again. The Synapse link for SQL Server, and we're going to explore data using Purview before we establish a Synapse link with the SQL Server. But before we go to the demo, I want to showcase how Synapse link currently architected, basically, right? So you have your SQL Server 2022 SQL instances and databases which are running on your on-premises, and your goal is that you want to really establish a Synapse link for the so that you can really run your analytics in the Synapse SQL pool. So the way it works is that in the Synapse service, you would create a linked service at first, which is going to point into your on-premises SQL Server instance, and as part of that, you will install the runtime host, SQL Server host integration of runtime SHIR in the on-premises environment. You can use one SHIR component to connect to multiple SQL Server instances as well. So you will be downloading the self-hosted runtime host, and then you're going to be installing that in the on-premises world. And then you're also going to create a landing zone, which is nothing but Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account, so that it can, the SQL Server 2022 databases can use landing zone to store the change feed, kind of intermittent storage. And then the data is being ingressed through the data ingestion actually happens through the ingestion service powered by Spark, so that it can read through the files which are the change feed files that are coming into the landing zone, and then it will apply those change feed to the SQL pool in the Synapse. So that's how the whole setup is done. And here the self-hosted runtime, self-hosted integration runtime component is going to be acting like a communicator between a linked service which is sitting in the cloud and then your on-premises environment. All the commands will go through this SHIR component, but the actual change tracking of the data which is coming into the SQL Server 2022 is mainly done by the SQL Server engine itself. So SQL Server 2022 engine will push the change feed into the landing zone, and then the Spark engine, which is sitting in the cloud, is going to keep track of those changes and going to apply to the Synapse link. So that's how this whole Synapse link is going to work. Now let's get into the demo. The experience starts from Synapse. So I log into my Synapse service here, and I created a WWI pool, a dedicated pool, and then I also have dedicated SQL endpoint. Now my goal is that I really deployed a SQL Server instance on-prem and created a wide world importers database, which is really going to keep track of my vehicle cargo. And then I also modified a specific table here, which is the vehicle stock items, and then also the vehicles tables. And then I inserted a bunch of vehicles information, stock items information into my on-premises SQL Server environment to begin with. Now I go to the Synapse, where, remember, we talked about at first you need to create a Synapse link which is pointing to your on-premises SQL Server 2022 instance, and also a landing zone, which is nothing but a data lake service or the storage that we created. Before I really establish a Synapse link, I really want to explore the data using our Purview service. Now I know that this is being certified by my company, Worldwide Importers Database, and I also know the owners who are the owners of that specific database, so that I can really contact them if I run into any issues. And then I also have a sales schema here, and I'm going to explore that sales schema so that I can get to customers. I want to know more about those customers here. And then it is also shows me that some of the columns or fields are classified, so that I can also comply with my compliance. And then there are specific columns here along with the classifications that my company is defined as part of the compliance policy. And then I also know the table owner, specific table owner, so that I can really reach out to the specific table owner if I run into any issues. That's how you can really use Purview to explore. Now I want to understand about the vehicles actually. Again, same way I can understand the specific data points and columns are classified, and I can get to the entire schema where I can see the schema city, the vehicle city, where it is being registered, and I also know the specific owner of the table so that I can really contact the owner for more information if I need to. So that's how you can really leverage Purview to explore the data. Now I go back to my original Synapse link that I created, and now I need to configure the specific tables that I want to link with the Synapse. So the source table and as well as the target tables, type is SQL Server, and I'm going to use the original Synapse link there, and my target is the SQL database pool. So all that information looks good for me. And then the landing zone is set up for the Synapse link, and that is the landing zone folder where my intermittent change feed is going to get stored. Now I can also monitor the status of the SQL link that I created by clicking that link there. Linked connections. No, I see that the data is being replicated right now, which is all good actually, right? Now I can go to the table. Now I'm going to do is I'm going to run a query to get to the cargo count on the source SQL Server. So I'm going to run that, and I see that all this data is already replicated on the Synapse actually, which is good. And now I can simply use a Power BI report to really find out where my vehicle's cargo is being located. So I can use the city map, and then where all those bubbles that you can see, they tell me the volume of the stock. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my source SQL Server, and then I'm going to pile up my stock actually. So I'm going to execute the command here. Now I go back to the Synapse dedicated pool to see if those vehicles are updated. Now I can see that my vehicles are updated. Now I can also use the built-in chart feature of the Synapse so that I can really view this data in different charts like bar charts and then as well as the pie charts. Now this is all has been integrated with the Power BI, and Power BI report is automatically updated with all my new cargo that I added. Now it is really simply showing all the new information. So that's the power of Synapse link and then Purview, that you can really use it. So you can connect your SQL Server to Synapse using the Synapse link, and then you use Purview to really explore your data, and then you can really create an end-to-end solution and integrate with the Power BI so that you can have a reporting going on as well at the same time. So that's the power of the cloud connected experiences with SQL Server 2022 with Synapse link, Purview, and as well as the Power BI. That concludes my demo here. Now last but not least, you can really maximize your cloud connected benefits by onboarding your SQL Server to Arc-enabled SQL Server in Azure. So irrespective of where you are running your SQL servers, whether they are running on on-prem or VMware environment, or if you are running their SQL servers in a multi-cloud environment, you can still onboard to Arc-enabled SQL servers so that you can really centrally manage and protect all those SQL servers from Azure. So the process is pretty simple. At first, you would onboard your SQL servers with Arc-enabled server. So that is going to install a Arc guest configuration agent in your on-premises environment. And then once Arc server enablement is done, then the next step is that you're going to onboard with Arc-enabled SQL Server. Then once both Arc server and Arc SQL Server are enabled on the Azure, now you can really start using Microsoft Defender to protect your SQL Server environment. And then you also can get a SQL Server best practice assessment enabled, so that you can really get the assessment about your SQL Server health, and if you are running into any risks and how to mitigate those risks as well. You will get all that benefits by enabling your server to Arc enabled servers. And one advantage with SQL Server 2022 is that we made the onboarding experience much simpler with SQL Server 2022. You can simply set up or onboard with Arc enabled SQL Server during your SQL Server 2022 installation, during your setup itself. So we introduced a new tab here called Azure extension for SQL Server. That's where either you provide Azure login, so that we can really use that login to onboard your SQL Server, or you can provide a principal that we can really leverage, and simply provide the subscription ID, resource group, the region where you really want to create your Arc SQL Server resource. That's it. And then at the end of the installation, not only that your SQL Server 2000 server being installed, but it also Arc enabled, so that you can really start managing your SQL Server from Azure. Okay, now I'm going to go give a small brief demo around some of the benefits that you're going to get. I'm doing a much deeper dive session, a separate session on the Arc enabled SQL Server, but for now, so these are the two resources that you see when you Arc enable your SQL Server, which is Arc server resource and then Arc SQL Server resource. With Arc server resource, you can really do a patch management from Azure itself, or you can really monitor your log files and create some alerts based on those log files, and you can get much more deeper monitoring insights in terms of your CPU utilization, your memory. You will get really rich monitoring capabilities from that. You can really monitor your performance of your server from this location. Right, you can really look at the CPU utilization, available memory, log disks and everything. Then, or the disk performance and all that. Then enabling to Arc SQL Server resource, you will get benefits like Microsoft Defender for cloud and environment health, and more capabilities are going to be built into here, so that you can really leverage the rich Azure services to manage your SQL servers which are running outside of your Azure. So let's take a brief look at Microsoft Defender. Microsoft Defender scans across your SQL Server environment and then provides a proactive, it will really protect your SQL Server. It identifies any attacks, any vulnerable areas that you need to really mitigate. For some of those vulnerabilities that are detected, it can auto mitigate them as well. But for those ones it cannot really auto mitigate, then it really gives you recommendations how to address those vulnerabilities, so that it continuously safeguard your SQL Server environment. So that's a huge benefit that you're going to get by Arc enabling your SQL Server. And then in the case of environment health, SQL Server environment health, also called as a SQL Server best practice assessment, will scan across all your SQL servers, get metadata around your schema, and collect your performance of your SQL Server. We look at performance logs, perf logs, and also DMVs to assess your performance, ongoing performance. We look at your security and compliance configurations. We look at our disaster recovery configurations. We not only report the health of your system in general, how healthy your SQL Server environment is, but then we also identify the risks that are associated with your SQL Server environment, so that if you can start addressing them proactively, then you can increase the health of your SQL Server basically, right? So most of our DBAs really spend a lot of time in monitoring the SQL Server environment or securing your environment. So with Arc enabled SQL servers, we automated all those activities for you, so that you can really focus more on you can get all those productivity back and then really work on fine-tuning your SQL Server and also architecting your SQL Server for your applications so that you can really work on more creative activities. So not only that, we identify the risks that are there with your SQL Server, but we also provide you the mitigation steps, how to mitigate those issues that we raised, so that you can really follow through that step-by-step guidance to fix it and bring the SQL Server to more healthy state. Right, so this is how we are also going to look at your schema. We look at tables, and we perform an index analysis and then identify specific tables that do not have any indexes. We recommend to create indexes to increase your read performance. That way, the health check is very comprehensive. It look at all the areas and then make sure that your systems are healthy. If not healthy, we provide you the areas where you need to bring to the healthy state. That way, you can really safeguard your SQL Server and also continuously monitor that. So that's kind of advantage that you are going to get when you really enable your SQL Server to Arc-enable SQL Server. With that, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation here. Now I'm going to conclude this session with by providing the links and references that you can really learn more about your SQL Server 2022, and the location where you can really download your SQL servers, and we made some of these concepts into PowerPoint decks as well. You can really get those PowerPoint decks from that location, and we make sure that we create the AKA links so that you can really remember these links to start your learning journey with SQL Server 2022. Hope I really provided overview around SQL Server 2022, how SQL Server 2022 is a more powerful database connected to cloud connected capabilities are going to help to increase your productivity for your applications. So thank you so much for your time, and I will see you next time.